Welcome to the Capital Coffee Connection. I am Liz Hirschnoff-Tolly, and I am very excited because today I have a special guest. He comes from Dallas, Texas, and he is currently the congressman from Dallas, and his name is Colin Allred, and we are here to talk about the heart and humanity of our elected leaders. But I did want to mention that he is also a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Texas, and he is running currently for the Senate. But today we are going to talk about who he is as a person. So I want to say welcome, Colin.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's interesting. So many people know you as a congressperson, a football player, a civil rights attorney. And while we'll talk a little bit about that, what I also want to speak about is that you are also, and I think probably your best roles are son, husband, and father.
That's right.
And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was preparing for this conversation, and then we'll jump right in, but I just wanted to say was one of the things, and I've seen you for the last maybe 5 or 6 years and watched how you are. And one of the things I think about with you, and you're a big guy, a football player, but you're a kind person.
No, thank you.
And, you know, right now in our world, you know, I think kindness is something that is really appreciated, and we don't always have that. There was a quote that I read I wanted just to start off with, which says, "I have found that it is the small everyday deed of ordinary folks that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love." And that was J.R.R. Tolkien.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. That's funny because I was just talking on the way over here about Tolkien. Anyway, but no, thank you. I mean, to me, being a football player, being a former linebacker, spending a lot of my professional career in like the most violent, setting legally possible, right?
Yes.
In some ways, I had to divide off, parts of my personality to be that, and then also, have who I was, which was that I've always been somebody who I think people have thought of as kind of kind-hearted, that I've always had, empathy for others. I come from kind of an unusual background, so it allows me to have sort of some insight, I think, into what it's like to be different.
Right.
And so I've always, sort of lived by the maxim of, there but for the grace of God go I in some cases. But, as a former linebacker, everybody thinks that you're going to be like the hard-charging, hyper-aggressive person.
Right.
And I was that when I played. I was captain of every team I was on pretty much, and that was a big part of my career. But I think you're right. I think that particularly now that we are at a stage, both in our country and around the world, where we could use a bit more reminding of our common values, of our shared beliefs, a bit of empathy for one another, understanding that everyone's fighting their own struggle, and you don't know what that might be, but you could be a positive force in their life or a negative one.
Right.
I know I've not always succeeded, but I've tried to be a positive one.
Yeah, well, it's an important part. And also, just those moments of kindness, what it shares with others, and that people who could be having a really bad day, if you just smile and you're kind, it actually, I think, gives them the opportunity to kind of come from where they are, which is someplace that might be uncomfortable or upset, and just kind of think, okay.
Yeah.
Someone smiled at me.
Yeah, and we were talking before this started about John Lewis, and he was mentioned at the State of the Union, and that was one of the only moments where everyone stood up to give a standing ovation. And I knew Mr. Lewis well, and he came to Dallas to campaign for me when I ran for Congress, and served in the Black Caucus with him. And the thing about him is that he couldn't go anywhere without everyone rushing up to him and wanting to take a picture and touch him and tell him how in some way he'd impacted their life. Right. And you would think that over the course of 40, 50 years of that, you might get a little bit, tired of it, that you might be a little bit short with some people. And he was never like that. I mean, he was the kindest person to every single one. And I think he consciously thought, we never talked about this, but I think he consciously thought, this is their moment that they're going to get to meet me and talk to me. And I want them to remember me in this way. And this is my way of continuing this struggle that I've been a part of, which was, to sort of try and perfect our union, to try and bring us together as a people. My favorite quote from him was that he'd say, we might have come here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now.
Right.
He'd say, we're all Americans. We have to find a way, to work together. It's amazing that, even though so many aspects of his legacy, everyone on that, at the State of the Union, so many folks who were there have been opposing them. But when we talked about his memory, everyone stood up because he was such a kind man.
Right.
And you couldn't deny that.
No, his character is beautiful.
His character, that's right.
So saying all those things, I believe that a lot of your character comes from your mom. and she was, a single mother raising you. And people know a little bit that she was a school teacher and that it wasn't always easy.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned also just growing up and there were struggles and that you sometimes felt, or maybe not sometimes, but you felt like you were an outsider. You didn't necessarily fit in, which I do believe a lot of young people experience for whatever their reasons are. But can you share a little bit about what it was like and what your mom imparted to you and what she was able to give to you as a single mom, which is a struggle for all, but also, and then what it felt like for you as a young person? Because I find that if people are going to listen to this, they can identify with youth very much and what our young lives were like, but they are all different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was a single mom and an only child, so it was kind of like us against the world. When I was 7, my aunt and uncle came into our lives, and they were very important as well, so I want to make sure that I mention them because, they helped to raise me.
Yeah.
Growing up, biracial and with a white mother, and, obviously people have learned this about, President Obama's story, but it does, when you're growing up, it's quite a paradox, right? Because I go out in the world and everybody sees me as, a black kid or a brown kid. They don't see me as, the same as my mom. And so then you come home and you have this kind of different experience.
Right.
And I think that over time, that just helped me develop an empathy. But my mom, I think also, she was a big believer in kind of self-accountability, which is that you can't, just blame your problems on other folks. You can't leave this to circumstance, that you kind of have to take, the bull by the horns and do it yourself. That's something that I think I've, certainly learned from her. She was somebody who any hint of bullying or any hint of like teasing, especially since I was such a really big kid, of like using, that in a way that, to try and take advantage of others. I mean, that was the thing that was the most like biggest betrayal, right, to her. It wouldn't be that you tried something and didn't quite get it right. It was that if you were using, for me, like my size and, athletic ability or whatever it might be to put anyone else down, she could never stand for that. And I think that's, unfortunately, we've seen some very prominent bullies in public life now. Yeah. And we've seen, I think, sort of a trend going on where it's almost like we're going back to, oh, it's okay if I say these things because I'm just keeping it real, right? And it's like, no, you're a bigot, or no, you're just a bully, right? And we have to go back to that being shamed, right? And that not being an accepted part, of our society. My mom would never, put up with that.
Yeah.
And I think that, when you grow up the way we did, where every paycheck is, paycheck to paycheck, and where, you go to the grocery store and for us, you swipe Teachers Union credit card because that's where our banking institution was. You'd kind of say a little prayer and just hope that, it went through.
Pass.
Yeah. Then you start to, understand, I think, a bit of what, it's personal to understand when folks are struggling, financially, the other stresses that comes with that. And that if you can just help out a little bit in some areas, what a big difference that made. For me, the YMCA had an after-school program at my elementary school where I could play sports and do my homework and hang out with, positive, male role models and other, figures. And I know that I wouldn't be all the things that I've done, from NFL linebacker to civil rights lawyer to serving the Obama administration to Congress. Like, none of that would have happened if it weren't for that.
Being a good father.
Yeah, a good father as well.
Your uncles, just for a moment, they came into your life when you were like 7, you said. And what was that like?
So it was my aunt and uncle. My aunt was my mom's sister. She was 3 years older. She was also a teacher in Plano. My mom taught in Dallas. And my uncle worked for FDA, which had a lab in Dallas. And so, these are middle-class, folks trying to, stay in the middle class. And they were really big on education, really big on having sort of like a very realistic and grounded plan. And I think that's part of why when I was in college and I graduated with a degree in history and I was ready to go to law school, an NFL agent started calling me and said they wanted to represent me in the NFL. I was just very dismissive of it. I was like, well, that's not going to be what I'm going to do, because I just came from a very grounded background where it's like, well, that's nice, but it's not going to work out. So I'm going to go to law school because I'm going to get a profession, one that can't be taken away and that'll always be there.
You don't peak at 30 or something.
Right. That'll be, a long-term, stable profession. Right. And so I think that kind of grounding led me to be like that, to where when I did get a chance, I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot, but I'm always going to keep this in my,
and go back to school.
My back pocket. And I think that's sort of the American story, sort of like, salt of the earth people who have, very realistic goals for their families, for their kids. What they want for them, isn't to be handed everything, but just to have a shot, to be able to get into a good career, to hope that your kids can raise their own families, that they can keep advancing.
Yeah.
That kind of story is exactly my story, which is of folks who, worked very hard to give me a shot, and had some institutions around us, from good public schools in Dallas, our YMCA, our JCC also, which I've spent a lot of time at, or my kids have gone to school in Dallas. These institutions were there.
It's a community, and that's what I think is very unique. That is really the American way, which is, we sometimes think it's just the family, but it is a community that raises a child and a family.
That's right. It is. And now that I have my own 2 young boys, I'm certainly aware of that, and you worry, my kids are at school right now, and you like, what's influencing them right now, right? And it has to be this positive, loving community, hopefully. And that's what I had. And I give, my family all the credit in the world, because, these are folks who, never made, more than $100,000 in a year. They worked hard, tried to save what they could. It was a big deal for us when I got a scholarship to play football, because then we didn't have to pay for school, and we couldn't have afforded to go to a very expensive school, without taking on a ton of debt.
You went to Baylor.
I went to Baylor.
So you stayed local.
Yeah, I stayed local. Baylor was not the school I thought I'd end up at, just because I don't know, it wasn't really on my list. But I visited it, and there was a linebacker coach there who I really liked, and it was an hour and a half away from Dallas, which meant that it was just about right, like far enough away that my mom wouldn't come every weekend.
But close enough that if you had laundry on the weekends, you could get home for it, or you needed a good meal.
Yeah, close enough that you can just zip up.
Right.
And so it turned out, like my first couple of years, it was a big culture shock, because Baylor was this private school, and a lot of the kids who went there were coming from pretty wealthy backgrounds, and I was literally like this kid with like $0 in my pocket and team issued clothing, here on a full scholarship, right? But over time, it grew on me, and just like anything else, it was the people who you put around you, and for me, it was my teammates.
And your coach that you said, this linebacker coach,
yeah.
What was it about, and what is his name, and what was it about the relationship? Because that's also a place where somebody was kind to you, and then probably became you were a mentee of his.
His name was Brick Haley. He was this like kind of short, squat. He looked kind of like a brick, so I think that's probably why they called him that. He was like really blunt kind of guy, and he was just a classic like football coach in every sense, and we hit it off really well, and he both kind of seemed, kind of like, we would have a great personal relationship, but also that he was going to push me some. And so I thought, well, there's worse things, that I could do than go here and work under this guy. And of course, as the way football goes, he left after my freshman year, but many other coaches came in and kind of stepped in. But I think there are so many coaches who played such a critical role in my life. And I think the kind of, stereotype of football coaches is like, always yelling and like, but most of them are really doing it because they're interested in trying to help shape young people.
Right.
They love the competition. They love, helping young people accomplish things. They love the game too, but they're using the game as sort of a way to teach life lessons in a lot of cases.
So let me ask you this. Going from football and then being a civil rights attorney, but going from football and understanding, working together and having a common goal, which is to win, and training hard, how does that prepare you for what you do in the political world?
Yeah.
And it's not a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah.
It's just how do you work together to get stuff done?
Yeah. Well, I always say I think that every elected official, particularly in a legislative body, should have had to have played on a team sport at some point, or been a part of like a team where you understood that there was something larger than yourself, that you are part of something, and that if you don't do your role, then the whole machinery can kind of fall apart. And I think that's one reason why I talk to a lot of athletes who will go into politics for a little while and leave. Like my friend Anthony Gonzalez left, John Runyon, who played against actually at the end of his career. He was in Congress for a little while, and I saw him at a game not long ago. And like a lot of athletes, I think we find this atmosphere to be just incredibly frustrating because we're just used to the idea that, we had a competition, which is, for us the game, but the game's over now.
And then you hug.
And we got to figure something out. We got to work together. Or like for us, every training camp, you're competing really hard with everyone at your position group, but you're still at the same time having to work together so that when that's over, that then you're going to go and try and do something collectively.
Yeah.
And I think we all kind of feel like we're collectively Americans, and that, yes, we are competing, we have an election, we fight it out, but then at some point we have to stop that part and do like the getting stuff done part.
Yeah.
And I think for athletes, that's really a difficult one.
I just remember when I was growing up that my family, I would see my parents and their candidate or their team would lose.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day they would be back in the game.
Yeah.
It wasn't, they didn't stop and they didn't say, oh, we're not going to participate because our candidate didn't win.
Yeah.
And I just remember growing up thinking, okay, that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
The sport analogy is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's why we're on a team, to work together.
Yeah.
And you could play, and you see it, you play all season long and you lose in the Super Bowl, but you go back to training again. And after the game, you still hug your opponents because they are your peers.
Well, yeah, we hug, we pray together, we do all kinds of things. But I think what I think has changed. American politics has always been rough. That's true. But I think what has changed is that political identities, in some cases, are now more important than your national allegiance or your allegiance to the Constitution or to your own values. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is just completely out of whack. Because we're talking about, we're on the same team, but you and I both know that there are some folks who don't think that we're on the same team, even though we're all Americans, right? And I think that's really corrosive to our democracy. And as an athlete, it's the exact opposite of how you're brought up.
Well, that's kind of why I'm doing this, because I think that if we have the conversations, and I enjoy speaking with people from both parties, is that we, at the end of the day, have similar values. We just have to remember to keep them as part of our practice, whatever we do in the public or in our work arena. So I'm going to switch now to going to your family.
Sure.
Because I know that you have an amazing, supportive wife who, in her own right, is a very talented attorney and does a lot of really good things. But then she also supports you, and you're traveling a lot.
Yeah.
And then you have 2 children. How do you all make it work?
Yeah.
And how did you find somebody that is so special?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think we used to call it outkicking your coverage, when you marry somebody who's like, better than you are. And
So you married up?
Yeah, I married up.
Yeah.
And I outkicked my coverage. Met my wife in law school. She was a better student than I was in law school. She's a better lawyer than I ever was.
Okay.
We've been together for about a decade now. And, she's wonderful. But you're right. I mean, she's having to hold down the home front in so many ways, in some similar ways to how my mom did.
Right.
Because, I won't be there for every bedtime or every pickup and as much as I try to. And we have a very equal parenting style. And, we've got 2 wonderful boys. Jordan is 5 and Cameron turns 3 this month. And, they're, the light of our lives. They are just incredible. I think my boys everybody thinks this, but I think they're just the cutest, kids ever. But this is everything that I wanted. And so when we had Jordan, I decided to take paternity leave. I put out a statement about it. We wrote an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News, our local paper, about how all the research showing that when men take leave, it's so much better for the family, for their spouses, for their kids, and for the men themselves in terms of how they feel about their kids, and that every American should have access to this and we should have paid family leave. So that was the idea. I didn't realize that I was the first member of Congress ever to take paternity leave because it was 2019. It seems like somebody would have taken it by then.
So you were the first to take paternity leave, which took a little too long, but you will not be the last.
Yeah.
So how does that work? And you have other colleagues that have taken since?
Yeah, I've seen so many folks, I think Ruben Gallego recently did as well, who've taken, leave and been proud about it. The goal is to make sure that everyone can do it because, in many ways, I'm my own boss. I work for the people of North Texas. And so, I can say I'm going to take paternity leave and explain it to them and then hope that they'll then reelect me. And they did. And so we have that flexibility. But for so many Americans, they don't have that. These early years, I think, for Americans and for Texans are incredibly difficult. Before you can get your kid into preschool, before you can get them kind of on that treadmill of, get them into the school system, those early years are so difficult for parents, for families, for the kids themselves. And we are losing so much potential in that kind of area. And I experienced it because my mom didn't have reliable childcare when I was in those early years. And I have some vague memories of it. She'll tell me about, the neighbor who she would have to leave me with, or just hope that, or she'd just bring me to every single thing, even when probably shouldn't, have had to be there, And I do think that, as a country and as people, we need to put more focus on, getting folks through these early years from, access to childcare, to nutrition, to early education, that we are forming, our next generation during those years. And we're doing it in the hardest way possible.
Right. Well, and the best investment in the future of any country is the children.
That's right. It is.
And you have to.
And that's a bipartisan thing. We all agree on that. Right. And I certainly, since I didn't know my father, I knew that I was going to be a very active dad. And, so my kids, they know me, they're going to know me their whole lives. I'm going to be, there for them at every step of the way. And I think that's, this is the payoff for the sacrifice that my mom and my aunt and my uncle put in, which is that now, my boys will go on, having grown up this way and having had access to things that I never did.
One of the things that a few years ago, a friend of mine's son had a daughter in class with one of your kids in nursery school. And he would remark that you would show up and you would, when you were in town, you would bring your son to nursery school and you would participate in the different activities. And this was already I think when he was maybe 2. And so I was thinking back then, wow, that's what a father is supposed to do.
Yeah.
But it was still remarkable that you, with your traveling and being in D.C. and being in Dallas and doing all that you do, that was your priority. So you weren't just talking, you were actually living it.
Yeah.
And I heard it from a friend, from her son.
That's funny. Yeah. I mean, my kids went to Jewish daycare and Jewish early childhood education centers in Dallas. And so I've been to Shabbat celebrations with them. And, and it's always funny because you're right. So my wife would go and nobody thinks it's remarkable that she was there.
Exactly.
But then I would come and I'd get a lot of attention. And, but I just want my boys to feel like they can rely on me and that I'm a huge part of their life and that, I'm not going to be some Disney dad who shows up
for the fun,
just for the fun parts, that we'll be there for the hard parts. And we're just now getting out of diapers with Cameron. He literally just potty trained. So we're stepping into a brave new world of no more diapers, hopefully, pretty soon here.
Good.
And
what's what's a fun family outing? What do you do that's just a normal, on a weekend that you do all together?
For us, we do all kinds of stuff, but I think I'll sometimes take some fake treasure that we have and I'll hide it around in our backyard or at a park, and we'll take them there and then be like, hey, do you see that? There's a gold coin over there, and my boys will go around and and they're just so excited, and the wonder of right. Discovery, right? And it's didn't you just see me hiding that but it doesn't matter,
no.
And my boys are incredibly physical, probably not surprising.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of wrestling, and I spend a lot of time being, attacked by them in the sweetest way possible. But we're not a big restaurant family, but just because I can't go everywhere all the time anymore. But I make homemade pancakes on most of the weekends when I'm home, and they'll help me.
Oh, very nice.
And so I'll be making actual pancakes, and they'll be making what they call messy stuff, where it's just like ketchup and relish and flour and they're just
and just mixing it all
just
up.
Mixing it all up, and then just as disgusting as possible. The smellier the better,
because they're boys.
Because they're boys.
Yeah, and
they'll end up covered in flour and stuff, and it's well, okay, it's time for breakfast. That's an ideal morning for us.
That's a perfect morning.
Yeah.
That to me is a perfect morning for you and your children.
Yeah.
Just quickly, for Texas, what is special about Texas and the people of Texas? Because obviously you have lots of different, but there are certain things that I know are special that I'd love for you to share with people today.
Yeah, I'm a 4th-generation Texan. I think I know our state pretty well. My family, my mom and my aunt grew up in Brownsville, which is the very tip of Texas, where my grandfather was a customs officer. He worked for the Customs Department before it was combined with Border Patrol. Went to school in Waco. And so, I've represented Dallas for the last 6 years in Congress. So I think I know who we are. And Texas is a really unique place. It's incredibly proud of its identity, obviously, and everybody knows that about Texans. They'll mention that very early on. You'll probably hear a Texan at some point say that it was its own country at some point.
Yes.
And that's all part of, we have a class that we take in middle school. It's Texas history. That's our history class for that year, is Texas history, not anything else. I think there's a lot of things to be proud of, but it's also sort of a meeting place of the South and the West. And so it's truly, Southwestern, and that's developed sort of an independent viewpoint on things where we're not as aligned with, some of the traditional South on many issues. And we have some, Western influences, but we're not as aligned as, the West is on some things. We have some, Southern influences.
Right.
And so it's this kind of confluence and meeting place of different ideas. And everything really is bigger. The size of everything, from 30 million people, in the state to, DFW having over 8 million people just in that metroplex alone, just a massive metroplex, the Houston metroplex, just enormous, right? And that's before you get to Austin and San Antonio. I mean, El Paso would be a big city in other states. For us, it's one of our smaller cities,
Yeah.
So everything really is bigger, and it's incredibly diverse and dynamic, and it's growing so rapidly. We are a state that's got, pluralities of people. It's not just Black, white, Latino, it's also East Asian and South Asian. We've got this incredible diversity and mix, Arab American, everything is there.
Yeah.
And the regions can be so vastly different in Texas. And you can experience almost entire, what you would normally see in other states within the same state. So I think it's a special place, but we have had a long history of kind of independent, pragmatic leaders who made a mark on the national stage, whether it's LBJ or Sam Rayburn or Barbara Jordan, even George W. Bush, right?
Right.
And we've gotten, unfortunately, in my opinion, a little bit away from that towards some more folks who I think are a little bit more following of whatever their national influence is, whether on either side. And to me, that's deeply un-Texan. Because usually Texas leaders are looking out for Texas first, and they're leading instead of being a follower, right? So that's my view of it.
That's interesting. Okay, so I have now a few rapid questions just to get to know you. One word, however you want to answer them. Take a fifth, whatever works. But just to give people an opportunity to get a little bit more about who you are. What is your favorite sound?
Sound?
Yeah.
My kid's laughing.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Your favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite smell? And don't say it's the smelly stuff they make in the morning on Saturday.
Fresh cut grass.
That's a nice one. Do you have, I know you're a sports person. Do you still have time to exercise?
Yeah, I try.
What do you do besides wrestle with the kids?
Yeah, I try to lift weights and run, but yeah, a lot of it is go for a walk with the kids.
And do you have music that you listen to when you work out? Do you have a playlist?
I do, yeah. I listen to Hamilton a lot, the soundtrack from that. I know that's kind of corny, but...
No, I love it. Yeah, it's inspiring.
Yeah, it's been my top 5 listen every year on Spotify.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, good. And who is your biggest cheerleader?
Oh, that's a good question. I think Allie is my wife. She sees the hard parts too, of course, and we're very much a partnership.
And she's honest with you.
She's honest.
She tells you.
She keeps me grounded.
That's the nice part. Yeah, she does. Do you have time for hobbies or anything?
Yeah, I used to, although I used to build computers, and I used to be really into that side. I had a computer repair business in college. It was mostly just repairing my teammates' stuff that they'd broken. Yeah. But I wouldn't say I have too many hobbies at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have time.
I spend my time with the kids.
I got you.
Yeah.
And if you were on a desert island and there was one meal, what would it be that you would eat as your favorite meal?
I think pancakes and scrambled eggs and sausage of some kind.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you were going to have to clean or do a household chore, what would your favorite chore be?
Well, I do the dishes every night, and I clean all the counters, and I vacuum every night. So that's I leave everything spotless. So
Allie would approve of your job. She's got you.
And when I'm not there, that's the problem, because when I come back, it's not as clean as I would.
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. And do you have time to read?
Oh, yeah.
So what kind of books do you read? What's a great book you've read recently?
So I really like historical fiction. So the book series I've gone through a ton is the kind of, I think people call it the Master and Commander series, where it's Napoleonic era, Age of Sail stuff. So I love that series. But then I do a lot of biographies and memoirs, and so, and particularly of civil rights leaders. Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters is one I've read several times, just because there's so many civil rights leaders who we don't remember their names. They weren't the ones who ended up being sort of on the Mount Rushmore of civil rights, but their sacrifices were incredibly important. Yeah.
The last question that I've asked everyone, and it kind of follows up that part about these unsung heroes, but they have really contributed. What I think about a lot of leaders is that people don't know what is making them tick. And so my last question goes to this concept of joy. We talked about kindness in the beginning and how much kindness can be shared and make other people feel good, but I think joy also.
Yeah.
So my question is, what is joy to you? How do you define joy, and what brings you joy personally? And then how does that joy then you're able to share it with others to bring them joy?
That's a really good question. I get a lot of joy in a job well done. I get a lot of joy in seeing my kids, advance in something, figure something out, learn something new. That's all, for me, the main things that I think about, is them, and also how we can do something well. I do think that I both have come from good teams and I try to build really good teams. And I think that allows the folks who work with me and around me to have kind of an outlet to where they can feel empowered. They can feel that they are, part of something special, that they can take a piece of that in all of my campaigns. Not just people who worked on the campaign, but volunteers,
Right.
I think, have felt that like we're all in this together. And then seeing the culmination of that and seeing kind of the outbursts that creates of like just true joy that we did this together.
Yeah.
It's better than something you did on your own. Like a cumulative effort. It's a better feeling.
Yeah.
It's better winning a team game. And I played individual sports as well than it was winning individually. When people ask me what I miss about the NFL, it's the locker room, it's the guys, it's the collective experience of having worked really hard to do something together.
Well, it's beautiful because I know that you have a lot of teams still.
Yeah.
You got your family, you have your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the things that I hope people have learned is that you are all these things that we see on the outside, but inside, you're really just a kind person that wants to make a difference in the world and wants to give back to your children and other children. And I thank you for being who you are and for joining us and letting people, being vulnerable and letting people learn a little bit more about who you are. And I just wish you luck and keep spreading joy, keep being kind. And we need that energy in this world. And you're a great leader and somebody that's really doing that just because that's who you are.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, it's Liz. Please join me every Tuesday for coffee to talk about heart and humanity with our elected leaders. Ciao.